Okay, thank you so much for arriving so promptly. We've got 50 people here already and it's 7 o'clock. That's excellent. I don't know about you, but it's been a long 18 months on Zoom now, but I'm still get so excited about these events, and we've got a stellar lineup for you tonight that Lecky has put together. I can't wait for things to get underway. Before we start, I'm just going to go through some Zoom etiquette, which I'm sure most of you are aware already, but I'll go through it now. So please keep yourself on mute throughout the event tonight. That's just so we don't hear any background noise. Because there's so many of us tonight, we're going to be asking questions mainly in the chat, but if for some reason we've missed you, then just raise your hand and one of the facilitators will spot you. Now, this is a really important one. If I need you to round up because it's someone else's turn, I'm not going to use the round up signal tonight because there's so many of you, I won't be able to see all of you. I'm going to use my great-great-great-grandmother's bell. It's a family heirloom. It's very nice. So if you hear that, now we've got a really excellent lineup for you today, and we've got time assigned to each person that's speaking tonight, and also so we've got a tight schedule, so I'm going to need to interject at times to ensure that we keep to that schedule. And also when it comes to you asking questions or answering questions, the same will apply. So please keep your questions and answers nice and concise so we can hear a lot of voices tonight. And if you hear the bell, that's my polite way of just saying it's someone else's turn and it's time to round up. What else then? Oh, the most important hand signal for tonight is the jazz hands, which is this one here. Now, as we can't shout and cheer and hug each other when we like what we hear, how we show that is the global appreciation, which is the jazz hands. And it's really lovely when you're talking to a screen and you can see a sea of jazz hands showing your appreciation. So let's just have a little warm up tonight, please. That's it. See, doesn't that look wonderful? Brilliant, thank you. So that's the Zoom etiquette done. Next, I'm just going to talk to you about the culture we have here at Dorset Can and what we're trying to create, what we have created. So we want to create a culture where the wisdom of the whole group is valued, where everyone will have an equal opportunity to express their views. To preserve this culture, I will need to politely interject at times to ensure we hear from a diversity of voices. We want to create a collaborative atmosphere where we are focused on solutions to problems and how we can find common ground. When we do challenge each other, we do it respectfully and to encourage each other to do better. The climate and ecological emergency is the biggest challenge of our lifetime. And everyone is here tonight because they care about their family and community and want to take positive action to address this great challenge. We all know deep down we are stronger together. So allow yourself tonight to be inspired to do more. Let's do this. Right then, so the agenda for tonight that Lecky has mastermind, that's Alexia Hasten, you can see on your screen. Just give us a wave, Lexi. Brilliant. So we're going to have an opening talk from Robin Walter. Then Lecky is going to do the project presentation on the Hedgerows and Woodland pasture project. Then we're going to have a short Q&A. Then each panelist are going to do a 2-minute introduction about themselves. And then we're going to go into breakout rooms where you'll be asked a couple of questions about, firstly, how you think you can contribute to this project, and then also have a little think about questions that you'd like to ask our panelists. Then we're going to go into a panel discussion where you'll have the benefit of talking to the excellent speakers that we have lined up for you today. Then we'll have closing comments and Lecky will talk to you about what next. And then If you'd like to continue the conversation, we have our famous Planet Purbeck virtual pub afterwards, where it's time for you to grab a drink, relax, and have an informal chat. So that's the agenda. That's everything else sorted. So over to you, Lecky, who is our land use coordinator and has masterminded this awesome event tonight. So I just want to give Lecky a big jazz hands in advance for the night she's put together. Thank you, Lecky.
Thanks very much, Rob. I'm going to move swiftly to hand over to our first speaker tonight, who is Robin Walter, who's very kindly joining us. Hopefully you've all read about Walter from the emails we've sent around, and he's got an amazing bio as a local Dorset resident, but with an extensive background in looking after our trees. Started off working with a tree surgeon, since worked as an arboricultural climber in London, on the Soars in Dorset, as a woodland manager on private estates, and as a woodland officer for the Woodland Trust since for many years. And now for the last little while, he's been working independently as a forester and writer. And Robin's going to base his presentation this evening on his recent book, published in 2020, called Living with Trees. So over to you, Robin. And a link to Living with Trees is in the chat.
Thank you very much, Alexia. Yes, here is the book, Living with Trees, published by Little Toller in West Dorset. There's a link to it in the chat. It'll take you to my website. So I'm speaking from Shaftesbury in North Dorset, and I've spent much of my working life in Dorset. So tonight I've got 20 minutes. I'm going to whiz through what would otherwise be a 45-minute talk. So we'll see how that goes. I'm going to share my screen. So
just while you're doing that, incredible to see so many people here tonight. 71, that's absolutely awesome.
Yeah, it's great to see so many people. There's some familiar names, familiar people there. Right, can you see that? Can you see my screen now? Yeah, okay. So Living with Trees, it's written for the environmental charity Common Ground. They asked me to write it about 10 years ago, and it's just come out. Well, actually not just come out, it came out last autumn. So Living with Trees traces our long association with trees through the millennia, noting what we've lost, celebrating what remains, and imagining a future with more trees in our lives. So where are we now? Well, humans, and some of this I'll be quoting from the book, and some of it'll just be off the top of my head. So humans were just once just one species living among many in the natural world. We soon outcompeted the other, and since the arrival of agriculture, we've seized more and more of the world's resources. As the civilizations have grown, trees and the natural world have suffered. Now, the wild natural world continues to function around us, but it's much depleted and altered. And our conquest of nature has reduced nature to a mere service provider and left us in Britain without any kind of woodland culture. So here we seek to restore the web of life, starting with trees. We started off as one of many parts of the web of life. We carved out a little bit for ourselves in our societies. We started exchanging things in an economy. But since the conquest of nature, we've enslaved plants and animals. And that's not worked out so well, either for us or for the natural world. And so nature now is facing breakdown, quietly fading away, but also raging against this disruption. So how might we put this to rights? How can we restore the web of life and our role in it? Well, as Richard Mabey says, trees are what dry land aspires to become. Trees are what dry land aspires to become. I love that quote. This is a Google map shot of Białowieża forest in Poland. It's the only bit of primary forest left in Europe. And we carved out our existence from the trees. And the real question is, why not trees? What have we done to stop trees growing everywhere? This is near Salisbury. This is our sort of typical southern England landscape of fields and the odd trees, roads, great slabs of our intent plastered across the land. This is what we're going to do, and we have the upper hand. And trees are relegated to the margins largely. So what have we lost and what remains? We only have isolated fragments of our native woodlands and some ancient trees, and these are the jewels in our crown. We must restore we must protect and restore them. This is a timeline from 10,000 BC. I'm going to whiz through this. The end of the Ice Age. These lands were covered in Arctic tundra, and the forest came back with its animals and people around sort of between 10 and 8,000 BC, and then the English Channel formed around 6,000 BC, and we got up to what has been called peak wildwood. May have been around 75% tree cover in Britain. Estimates vary. I won't go into that. You all know about Hans Vera and his grazing models. Anyway, over the millennia, from about 4,000 BC, first of all, Neolithic farmers started carving out a living, followed by the Bronze Age with metal tools, and then the Iron Age came along with metal axes and plows, and really took the cover down from about 50% to about 20%, which is what the Romans found when they came a couple of thousand years ago. The Normans recorded woodland in the Domesday Book. Rackham reckons it was around 15% in England. 15%. So most of it was gone 1,000 years ago, or even 2,000 years ago. Most of it was gone. And then since then, of course, sorry, I can't see that because the. But yeah, so in the last 100 years, in Britain, the forest cover went to less than 5% around 1900. And after the First World War, the Forestry Commission was set up, and we're now back up to 13%, 13%. But that's still very little. The European average is round about 30 or 40%. You can see here, Northwest Europe is pretty poorly forested compared with Central Europe and Southern Europe. And of course, the Nordic countries are very heavily forested, 60, 70%. So we have 13%. So we live in a massively depleted landscape, but it's just kind of what we see as normal. So what sort of forests remain? Well, we've got Caledonian pine woods, we've got upland oak woods, we've got broadleaf, sort of mixed broadleaf. These are the kind of woods we find around here. Oak ash, hazel, things like that, with their characteristic species. The classic bluebell woods, looking so great at the moment. Beech woods, this is the New Forest, with their very special flora. And of course, a lot of these ancient woods have been planted over with conifers. They're what's called plantations on ancient woodland sites, pores, which tends to blot out the ground flora. Although where there's enough light, it can survive and can be restored. The Woodland Trust have been leading the way on that for the last 20 years. As well as ancient woods, we have ancient trees. This is 1,300 years old. And this was first around in 700 AD, Saxon times. This is in Windsor Great Park, home to characteristic species, stag beetles and things like that. So you'll see in the last 100 years, we've increased our forest cover from 5 to 13%. But of course, what we've gained is quite different from what we lost. And a lot of it, about half of our forest cover is plantation conifer. Here in a slab on the North York Moors. And here in North Devon, it's a bit more integrated into the landscape. So, having a look at our long association with trees and what we've lost, we're now going to look at what remains and how do we interact with trees. Well, we encounter them in our lives all over the place. Starting at home, if we allow each and every garden is a living laboratory for trees. We can test our relationship with nature by what happens here. This cherry tree has been allowed to grow full height right next to a house. Absolutely marvellous. Other places, you might want to control nature a bit more rigorously. But whatever we do, nature will always push up through the cracks. This is Shaftesbury, the new Tesco. But this little patch of land in between the housing estate and the supermarket has left enough space for these ash trees, and there's some sycamore behind as well. The specimen trees that were planted in this little courtyard were all vandalised and died within months. So nature wins out in this case. Trees can make hard urban, concrete and glass into gardens of light. And of course, 80% of us live in towns, and that's where we are going to encounter trees. Most people encounter trees in towns, so they're vitally important. This is in Norwich. The person living next to this tree has adopted the tree and planted some daffodils around it. It's just a lovely example of looking after your local trees. And of course, the bigger the better is also the message. It's important. Many benefits of trees: shade, transpiration, cooling, pollution interception, all that kind of stuff. The bigger the tree, the bigger the leaf area, the more efficient trees are going to be, the more benefits for us all. So these are lovely plane trees on the South Bank in London. It's important to let have big trees. Now, here in Shaftesbury, there's a tree group which I'm a member of, and we've published two lists of two walks around town, 3 walks around town, and pointing out the sort of significant trees of Shaftesbury. And we often have about I think on one of them we had about 60 people. Very hard to give a talk to 60 people. Actually, it's easier on Zoom, as we're seeing. But people sort of absolutely love it. They say, "Oh, I never noticed that," or "I never knew that," or "What tree is that? I walk past it every day and I never known." So, if any of you want to do some sort of local tree action, a tree group, a walk around town with someone who knows, roughly what they're talking about, is a really good way of doing it. And if you can get a map, so much the better. We've also planted with the tree group some trees. These are some sort of threshold trees on the way into town from the south. Some lime trees in Metal Guards. We've also just done some planting on council land, and I can talk about that perhaps in the chat about what a tree group might do. So what have trees ever done for us in the wider context? Well, people love forests but hate forestry. Cutting down trees and all that, people wince when they hear a chainsaw. Well, I spend a lot of my time with chainsaws, and they can certainly do a lot of damage. But also, if we want to have wooden furniture, wooden artifacts, wooden houses, we need a supply of timber. We import 80% of our timber. 80% comes from overseas. And, we should really take more responsibility for using that and to use it well. So I'm all in favour of expanding our plantation forests for more timber. But we have to do it very carefully. And of course, there's other competing land uses. We need conifer and we need broadleaf, and we need plantations at scale. The UK is the second largest importer of timber in the world after China. China, admittedly, is a long way ahead, but we're the sort of head of the pack for the sort of next tier down. And forestry industry is worth about £2 billion. Compared with agriculture, that's about 8 billion, and financial services is 124 billion. So in the scheme of things, forestry is quite a small player in terms of money, but of course, in terms of landscape, it's 13% of the land. So it has this rather peculiar position in Britain. So if we want more trees at scale, not just plantations, but more native woods and conservation woods and linking up other woods, where are they all going to go? Well, 70% of Britain is farmland, or farmed in some shape or form. So we really need to find an accommodation between trees and farming, which might be easier now we're out of the CAP. And I think, you know, great minds are working on how that could be integrated better. Yeah, so if we want to double tree cover or even triple it to come up with the European average, we're going to have to put trees, you know, integrate trees into farmland. One way of doing it is like in northern France, they have bocage, these great big bushy hedgerows, which are really, you know, linear woods between their fields. So we, on the right there, you can see a field of maize growing very happily next to, you know, within a very well wooded landscape. So that's one way of doing it. Another way of doing it is agroforestry. This is strips of hazel with strips of wheat in between. And of course, you can integrate trees with cattle as well. There's a line of pears and willows that, well, I don't know, in about 10 years' time, will provide some shade and cover for these animals. And of course, maybe we can plant some more trees in the uplands. This is mid Wales. So new ways of working with woods. Forestry shouldn't just be the preserve of a sort of distant, you know, group of contractors who come in and fell everything. This is Axewoods. They're active in East Devon, so not very far away. And it's a community wood fuel co-op. They manage woods on behalf of the owners who get sort of work done, which would otherwise cost them money, and they all go away with some logs, and they also provide a kind of log bank, a bit like a food bank for people in fuel poverty. So it's a really nice model. They chop it all up, and then even if you can't work chainsaws, you can come along and help out, stack wood, and things like that. In Scotland, another way of engaging people with woods is the community buyout. This is Kilfinnan. It's quite popular in Scotland to buy your adjacent Forestry Commission wood, and there's a sort of right to buy there in Scotland to enable that. You know, quite large, you know, hundreds of hectares of woodland have gone into community groups. And of course, it doesn't all have to be forestry in cutting down trees. This is Foundry wood in Leamington Spa. It's a sort of health and well-being wood carved out on some what used to be derelict ground has grown up with a sort of self-seeded wood. And Kath Pasteur, the director, says, we've taken a neglected space and we've transformed it into a thriving community woodland. And we're doing the same with people. We're taking neglected and isolated people and we're bringing them into this space and creating a community that can enjoy this woodland. And they've been kind of going through the pandemic with various kind of restrictions. And of course, another very useful use of woodlands is in timber buildings. It's a long-term carbon sink, and this house in the picture manages to sequester tons and tons of carbon rather than a bricks and mortar house, which obviously in its making is emitting carbon. So it's a sort of carbon negative undertaking. Much more popular in Scotland than in England, but there's a lot of scope there.
Just quickly, Robin, 2 minutes left. Brilliant talk. Really enjoyed it.
Okay, right. So our future, how are we going to go forward? Right, we're going to really move now. So we're at kind of crisis point now. How might we need to think big. We need to, instead of following blind market forces, we need to hold a bold vision. We need to reweave our little piece of the web of life, including ourselves. We do have the power to restore nature. I'm going to whiz through this now. We've done it before. After World War I, we set up the Forestry Commission to build a strategic reserve of timber. After the Second World War, we set up the welfare state and the National Health Service in a time of great, huge public debt and great public need. It was a bold vision that brought that about. At the moment, we only spend about 1% of our public spending on woods. So what might we aim for? That's where we are now. Could we get back up to the European average of 30%, or should we aim higher? There's some great projections out there from the Forestry Commission, the Centre for Alternative Technology, and this startling one from going back to 60% cover if we get rid of all farm animals. I think that's more of a thought experiment, really. We can do planting, but it can end up as sort of the same old control of nature, or we can go use rewilding. This is NEP, where the oak trees grow up in a patch of brambles to protect them from the deer. Scottish cairngorms, completely denuded, but once there were trees here 1,000 years ago. And they're coming back. The granny pines are seeding new trees in the heather once the red deer have been taken out. So we can restore the web of life. Not how much can we afford to put down to trees, but how little tree cover can we afford for an ecologically functioning landscape. So what might this look like? This is the last sequence now. We can bolster the woods we've got. The ancient woodland needs to be enlarged. We can plant some productive conifer on the low-grade uplands. We can allow some rewilding in the wilder areas. We can plant some riparian woodland. We can have an orchard next to the town. We could have some agroforestry on the arable land, and maybe some silvo-arable agroforestry on the uplands as well. And all of this will bring back the wildlife and create a woodland that we can all enjoy in our various ways as members of the community, of the living community. So there we go. There we go. That's it. End of story. Good. Thank you very much. There's a load of details there. You can get them all later, I'm sure. I'll stop sharing and okay.
We just show our appreciation for that incredible talk.
Thank you very much. Well, golly, well, it's lovely. Lovely to see the hands.
It was brilliantly put together, Robin. I've written down so many facts I didn't know. The fact that we import 80% of our timber. That we've gone from 5% to 13%. I didn't know that we've actually got more now in the last 100 years, which is, I guess, a positive slightly, but we still need to get more, obviously. And then just the way you finished there with the National Nature Service and, showed what we can do and how we introduce the NHS and how it is within our power and what little money we spend on this right now. And I think I'm inspired. My heart rate was increasing as you kind of finished there. I was really getting psyched up for doing something here in Purbeck. And I think it tees up Lecky perfectly now to tell us how we can implement your vision here in Purbeck. So over to you, Lecky.
Thanks, Rob. And thank you so much, Robin. And it was such a thought-provoking talk. And I think challenged maybe some of the assumptions I've made around kind of protecting trees rather than the scope with which we can live among and with, be a part of that landscape. And I'm also really excited that what I'm about to talk about now is dovetails with where you've ended up, and it's really exciting to think that hopefully we can bring about some of the changes that you've mentioned in your book right here on our doorstep. So I'm the land use coordinator, and Planet Purbeck is about action, and I'm here to present our plans for our first practical project. So I'm just going to share my screen. Okay. Can you see that, Rob? Maybe a thumbs up.
Okay. Great. Just before you start, Lecky, there'll be a chance 5 minutes at the end of Lecky's talk to ask questions. So if you could just put them in the chat, Lecky will answer them at the end. Thank you. So
on that front, we're so delighted this evening that we've got a panel of very distinguished experts with us, who are real experts with a great deal of experience in conservation and ecology. So I'm going to focus very much on the practical aspects of the project that we've got in mind and its kind of current state. It's very much in the planning phase. And then there'll be a bit of a Q&A for any clarification around that at the end. But my request is that you save all of your really difficult questions for the experts. So now, why hedges and why wood pasture? Robin has framed this already, but I really wanted to emphasize that the importance of hedges. Collectively, they're one of the largest habitats in the UK, and they have an extraordinary role to play. They're thought to play host to over 3,000 species of wildlife. They are involved in carbon capture, they're involved in preventing flooding, and they have a significant heritage value as part of the landscapes that we are all used to. But sadly, they are massively declined over the past decades. And between the decade from 98 to 2007, the total length of the managed hedgerow in England decreased by 26,000 kilometres. While it may feel that developing a hedgerow is quite a modest contribution to the environmental crisis that we find ourselves in fact, in promoting hedgerows, we're participating to a national effort to reinstate these crucial features in our landscape. And actually, the Climate Change Committee has called for 200,000 kilometres of new hedgerow, which is the equivalent of twice the circumference of the moon. So we're going to be doing our bit towards that. So wood pasture, another managed landscape, which is a very ancient landscape in Britain, a mixed habitat of often magnificent, large, mature trees in amongst grazing pasture land. And actually, this mixed habitat has an even higher conservation value than forests. But this ancient landscape doesn't readily renew because the growth of new sapling trees is impeded by heavy grazing. And so if we're able to plant and protect what will be tall standards in due course, we're providing the ancient and veteran trees of our future. Sorry. So what is this project not? It's not planting trees everywhere and everywhere. It's not a suggestion that trees are the only solution. But what it is the right trees in the right place. So we want to develop nature corridors that provide flight paths for bats, safe passage for wildlife moving between feeding grounds, ponds, woods, and streams. We want to do our bit to respond to the two major environmental crises of our time, that of climate change and biodiversity loss. And this project is scalable year on year. So when you see some of the maps that I'll show you a bit later on in this presentation, you'll see that the potential for this being delivered at scale is very real. And what this project is about our landscape and our countryside, our involvement with enabling our local environment to flourish, to see more wildlife, more birds, more flowers, and indeed more blackberries with all those additional brambles in the autumn. So what are we actually going to do? This is a map of Purbeck, and the blue lines represent all of Purbeck's rights of way. And you can see, I don't know if you can see my cursor, the orange lines here are Planet Purbeck's proposed target routes. So they're the routes that so far we've identified as ones we'd like to work with. And you can see that the area that we're focusing on in Purbeck is between the Chalk Ridge, which runs to the north here, and then the limestone cliffs to the south. And the reason that we're focused on the Purbeck Vale, which you can see here in more detail, is that it's an appropriate hedgerow country. It's predominantly agricultural and the soil type is generally right. So we've identified these routes for a number of reasons. Firstly, we feel that they are achievable. So based on the landowners and the current land use, we think that these are likely routes that we would be able to work with. But this is very much in its infancy and subject to change depending on feasibility and whether it's desirable. The stage we're at the moment is we're surveying these routes, firstly just to make sure we know who owns them, how to engage and deliver the project there, what the suitable intervention would be, and also to double check the amenity value, just so we're not interfering with very precious views of the sea or Corfe Castle, for instance. And you'll notice also that the rights of way that we've chosen around the settlements. And that's also that we feel it's really important that this is a visible and publicly engaging project. We want it to be really owned and looked after by the local community. And actually what we want to try to do is embed the delivery and maintenance of the project with local environmental groups. So here we've got Corfe Castle Parish Council Environment Group, Langton Planner Action, and over here, Sustainable Swanage. And members of those even more local environment groups are here with us tonight, which is fantastic. So sorry, I keep pressing the wrong button. So what are we actually going to do in these places? Well, firstly, we don't have a one-size-fits-all approach. And I thought this map will illustrate a little bit what we've got in mind. What we're going to do is going to depend on the site, the current land use, the trajectory of the path, for instance, if it goes along an existing field boundary or whether it crosses a field, and also practical issues such as maintenance, which is crucial. So for instance, you can see here that this section of hedgerow here up at Whitecliff outside Swanage is going to be fenced and thickened through natural regeneration. This area, my cursor, this area here to the north of Swanage, where you can see the rights of way cross diagonally across open agricultural land, that's the sort of site that we feel would be most suitable for developing into wood pasture. And then, for example, this right of way coming out to the south of Swanage, which connects Townsend Nature Reserve with Durlston Country Park, is a perfect site for planting a new hedgerow along the existing public rights of way. So I hope I've made the case for why we've selected public rights of way as a starting point, but I don't wish to think that we are limiting ourselves to that narrow scope. And actually, we've already looking at working with some other projects, for example, to in the medium term to extend some woodland areas. This is an area near Woolgaston where the National Trust are currently working with their tenants to increase woodland, which we hope to be involved with in the coming years. And also Dorset Wildlife Trust are looking at doing some planting along the Corfe River. And that could involve some really exciting planting of very rare native species such as the black poplar. So in order to support these projects, we're planning to develop 2 Purbeck tree nurseries, and that they will serve to feed into our planting projects in the longer term. And this means that we can have a local provenance for our trees and maintain some of the genetic stock of our highly successful established veteran trees. It also is a feasible source of trees, as currently there's not enough trees to meet the national demand for planting. And so crucially, along with the rest of this project, it's a local community-led initiative, enabling us all to understand and connect with our trees right from their very seeds. So we have 2 projects. The first is we have a site identified, which is just outside Kingston on the Encombe estate, thanks to James Gugero, who sadly couldn't join us here this evening. So this is the first of the 2 nurseries. It's currently very much at the planning phase, and that's being led by the Corfe Castle Parish Council Environment Group. Some of the members are here tonight. And secondly, a project by Sarah Sperling from Sustainable Swanage. Sarah's here as part of our expert panel, and we'll be able to talk about this more later. But this is a map from Dorset Explorer showing the veteran trees that we have here in Purbeck. And her project is really about promoting, protecting, and also propagating from these grand and highly successful trees in this particular landscape, and ensuring that we have their genetic offspring for the veteran trees of the future. So I hope that gives you an overview of where we're at with the project. And lastly, I just want to go through how, if you would like to, you can be involved. So firstly, please join us. We currently have a platform, an online platform called Mighty Networks, which as you can see here on the picture to the right. And it's a platform where any member can connect, we can share ideas, share information, ask questions, and work together to deliver these projects. As you can see, we already have a bunch of groups there that you can take your pick from. Hedgerows, the Tree Nurseries, the funding group, the Seagrass Restoration group. And at this moment, I just want to also drop in another project that we've got cooking for later this year, which is our Leaky Dam project, which is another of the land use team's projects. So there will be information on that platform where we're asking local volunteers to act like beavers and pollard local willow on the east aspect of Corfe Common, which you can see there in the map. And that will be to slow the flow on some of the tributaries to the Corfe River. And in doing so, reduce any sort of risk of flash flooding, which is more likely with climate change, filtering out the nutrients, and also provide wetland areas which are great for biodiversity. So again, if you're interested in that project as well as any of our others, please come on board. If you have any questions about any of the talk this evening, then please email me directly, alexiahasem@gmail.com, and I think Luke will kindly be putting my details in the chat. And also any more information about Planet Purbeck as a whole, go to our website, planetpurbeck.org. So in addition to help with the Hedgerow project, Richard Bradford, who has got many years experience in the conservation sector, has kindly agreed to have a hedgerow outing to celebrate the first National Hedgerow Week, which is taking place on the starting on the 29th of May. So when anyone interested going out to have a look at what a well-managed, good hedgerow looks like and identify some of the species that can be found there, please get in touch with me and I can send you some more details. The other thing we'll be asking people to do this autumn is come out and gather seeds for the trees, for the tree nurseries. But also, if you notice any suckers or saplings in your gardens or land that you don't think are wanted, then please hang on to them and we can give them a home this winter. And lastly, if any of you would like to be practically involved in delivering this project, then we're having monthly land use meetings. The next one's going to be on Tuesday, the 25th of May at 5 p.m. So if you're interested in getting involved in delivering what should be a very impactful and meaningful project, then please do get in touch. Thank you all very much for listening, and any questions, please post them in the chat and I'll do my best to answer them.
Thank you so much, Lecky. Well, there we have it. There's lots of practical projects we can get stuck into. So thank you so much, Lecky, for producing that great plan. We've got 800 supporters and members at Planet Purbeck, all been itching to get stuck into a practical project, and you've provided that. And I think, judging by the reception you got there, I think there's lots of people that are willing to get stuck into this. So thank you so much. So any questions, please, for Lecky? We've only got a couple of minutes. If you pop it in the chat, she can quickly answer them.
So I'm just going to have a quick peruse and say them out loud. So we have one from Ed Bursey. I've mentioned a local nursery to preserve some local genetic stock. I'd be really interested to hear more about the importance of genetics. Is this to preserve local only species, or is it better to develop tree stock from local established tree seeds? Thank you very much, Ed. That's a brilliant question. Please, can I hold that, and I'll direct that to Sarah Sperling, who is actually managing the Veteran Tree Nursery project, and I think she'll be much better placed to answer that. So I'm going to take a note of it and pass that on. Sorry to be dodging that one.
That's great, thanks.
Well, we have slightly overrun, so do you want to quickly answer that, Sarah?
Well, that is a very interesting question. It's one it's something we're looking into and discussing with people, but I can cover it a little bit more when I tell you a bit more about the project in my update. Yeah,
that's perfect.
And I can put a question here about native versus native species, for example, the sycamore, which is perhaps something that could also come up in the discussion, which is very relevant.
Okay, super. Well, just because we're tight on time, we're going to move on to the next part of the schedule, which is brief introductions from all of our panelists. So we've got Robin Walter, Richard Bradford, Sarah Sperling, Tony Warne, Nigel Hewish. If you've all got 2 minutes to quickly introduce yourselves before we go into breakout rooms. So yes, Robin, have you already, is there anything else you'd like to say?
Haven't I said enough already? Yeah, that was a really interesting thing about Purbeck. I know Purbeck reasonably well. They look like great projects. I didn't say anything much about hedgerows apart from the bocage thing in France, the big fat wide ones. And of course, wood pasture is a thing. It's kind of a feature of rewilding, especially at Knepp. Kind of big animals roaming around a wooded a landscape with trees and scrub. I'd be happy to talk to anyone about anything really. I think you know all about me now, so I'll pass on.
Thank you, Robin. Sarah Sperling from Sustainable Swanage, your 2 minutes starts now.
This is it. All right. Yeah, Sorry, Fee. Yeah, so thank you for setting up this really interesting meeting. It's been wonderful so far. An evening with trees is a perfect way to spend time, I think. Just a little bit of my background briefly. I've been working in the environment sector for over 20 years now, which I can't believe it seems like a really long time. I've been a countryside ranger and worked in environmental education, and recently been officer for Litter Free Coast and Sea. So running community campaigns and engagement. I have a particular interest in trees and lichens, and I've been involved particularly in a project at Lulworth when I was working there, setting up woodland surveys and lichen monitoring, and we also set up a tree nursery there. Most people know me as the Sustainable Swanage Project Officer. I've been involved in community tree planting projects in the town, at schools, at church, and on public land, on verges, and recently an orchard that we planted in Swanage. And we're now setting up a tree nursery project here in Purbeck as part of a scheme protecting and promoting the veteran trees, which Alexia explained very well for me earlier, just now. This is a separate project, and it's funded by the Witch Farm Landscape and Access Enhancement Fund, and it's called Purbeck's Precious Past. So just briefly, it's estimate hopefully it'll be about 3 years. So 3 main streams. I just put briefly: identify, collect, grow and plant. That's what we want to do. And we are particularly looking at the genetics and local provenance, because those are the trees that obviously do well in this area. So the ones that are veterans, have been around for a while. And we are looking into the importance of genetics. And we've been talking to Kew Gardens about sort of their sort of schemes and their tree seed collection schemes. So that we'll be developing. I've only been doing it for about 4 weeks now, so it's all early days. We're currently making a list of species to collect suited to this area. And so I'm looking at what's native. Or do you want me to finish now? Sorry. My points for discussion was going to be about that, about genetic and what's native. Do we explore other species? And this project is fantastic. It's really exciting. I'm looking forward to working with you on it as our project's working together. So thank you very much.
Great to hear from you, Sarah. And thank you for all the great work you've done.
Thank you too.
Looking forward to collaborating. So as we're going through audience, as our panelists are introducing themselves, let that just kind of start your creative juices going and start thinking about the kind of questions you would like to ask our panelists later after the breakout rooms. Tony Warren. Tony, you're on mute.
Right. Okay, sorry about that. Yes, I'm actually vice chairman of Trees for Dorset, and I'll just say a bit about myself first. I'm actually I wear several hats. I'm an entomologist, so my interests lie between plants and birds and things that eat insects. The mess that you see behind me consists of large numbers of insects of one sort or another waiting to be identified, which is a very slow process. I started in entomology when I was about 2, when I had a rather too close encounter with one of my father's beehives. Before I was vice chairman of Trees for Dorset, I was actually chairman of the International Tree Foundation, which is an organisation that was the Men of the Trees, of which you may have heard. It was founded in 1935 by Richard St Barb Baker, who came from just north, came from Eastleigh originally, spent some years living in Dorset, around Abbotsbury sort of area. And he founded the Men of the Trees, which promoted tree planting all over the world, and the International Tree Foundation continues that. And so I was not only involved with tree planting projects in this country, but with ones in Africa and India and so on, and even in Chernobyl. The thing we do mainly in Trees for, one of our main planks of action in Trees for Dorset, is an educational project with junior school children. And this introduces them to trees as soon as they start at their primary education, and takes them through the 4 years while they're at school, so that as they're there, the trees grow and get bigger. Nigel Hewish actually thought of the idea for the project that my life, my tree growing together. And that's what they do. We get them to plant the trees, and then they watch them grow. They have a little tree nursery at school, right? Okay. And then they plant them out in their local environment. And I think getting children when they're young is absolutely essential to this process. I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. It's great to have someone with so much expertise and experience, and a great note to end on. Nigel Hewish. Welcome.
Hello. Thank you. Yeah, I'm Nigel Hewish. I'm head gardener at Kingston Warwick College. I've been here 30 years now. And one of my jobs is managing the trees that we have here, which is a great thing. I'm really interested in trees, always have been, and I think all the other people have said the things that I was gonna say. So Robin said about the different trees, and that's the thing, is that it's the forests and woodlands, it's the individual trees, the street trees, it's down to just the individual specimen tree in somebody's garden. Whatever that might be. So often today, with planning, the trees are an add-on, whereas really we ought to be thinking of them in the first instance. A few projects I have seen where trees have been planted first, and now some of those have had to have been taken out as the project has developed, but at least the trees were in the ground and growing. And that's what we should be thinking about, is getting trees in the ground. It's something I'm quite passionate about, and I've been doing it so long now. You know, I think back to when I was a small boy going out on a Saturday afternoon for a picnic in the woods, and with father digging up the seedlings and putting them in the thermos flask once we'd drunk our tea to bring them home to plant out in our nursery at home. So I think the nursery is a really, really good project, and we all ought to have one everywhere, even if it's just a corner of our garden, to grow on these trees. And when we say about native and non-native, let's just go for trees to start off with.
Thank you, Nigel. Brilliant. That's lots of positive waves coming back your ways. Awesome to have someone with so much experience, and I love the idea of us all having a nursery in the corner of our garden. Thank you so much. So now it's time for breakout rooms. Some people get a little bit spooked by breakout rooms. Oh no, I'm going to be talking to someone I don't know, but just see it as an opportunity to meet someone new, to talk with like-minded people. And the reward you'll get at the end of your 15-minute breakout room is talking to our awesome panelists. So you're going to have 15 minutes in your breakout rooms. There'll be a facilitator in there. You will need to nominate a note taker. The role of the note taker will be to take notes and then email them to Alexia after the event, and also to feedback on these questions. So the first question is, how do you think you can contribute to this project? This could be ideas, time, practical input, land, money. And the second question is, just please discuss about anything that might have sparked your interest to generate 2 questions for our panel. Lecky.
There is one more expert in our midst that hasn't introduced themselves. So could we just give a couple of minutes to Richard Bradford, who's here too?
Yes, of course. I was right at the top. I missed it. Sorry, Richard, my mistake.
No worries, easy to happen.
I'll have to put different glasses on next time.
Thanks very much for inviting me here. I'm out of patch. I'm from Dorchester, but have an interest in trees, which so it's good to be here. I trained as a botanist and then went on to train as a landscape architect. But most of my working life was in the conservation sector. I worked for the government agency, English Nature at the time. I worked for a county council. I went freelance for a while, and I ended up 7 years with RSPB. Most of my work was on the Somerset levels, the flat wet bits that seems to get in the news regarding flooding. And most of my work was working with farmers who were interested in trying to make more space for nature on their farms. Retired a couple of years ago and now live in Dorchester, where I'm one of the volunteer coordinators for Transition Town Dorchester in planting trees. They've been planting trees on Duchy of Cornwall land for the last 5 years, almost entirely hedgerows, and they put in over 5,000 hedgerow plants. And we've probably finished that job now. And I'm also one of the hosts for the Trees Be Company, which is the Urban Tree Festival in Dorchester. We did it online last year, and we're going to do it online again this year, starting on Saturday. My prime interest is kind of hedgerows and hedgerow trees and the possibility of their role in nature recovery. I think the long-term interest of hedgerows is something which people do find fascinating, you know, the history of the hedgerows. I'm interested in the debate regarding tree planting versus natural regeneration. I'm interested in the source of the plants as to whether or not working with local provenance to what we have now will actually be good when the trees are 300 or 400 years old, when the climate could be very different, and as to whether or not we should actually be thinking about a wider source of trees for the future. And I'm interested in trees for bees and trees in people's gardens and the connection between trees and people, as exemplified in Robin's book. And I'm here to learn. That's the main thing. I'm here to learn.
Thank you, Richard. Super. And you were absolutely bang on time there as well. Thank you. Well done. Thank you so much. So into breakout rooms then. The questions, I'll just pop in the chat now. Oh, you've put them in there. Well done, Luke. So with the questions, you can see them there. Have a quick look at them now. I will also broadcast them into your breakout rooms. The first question, if you could, when you come back from the breakout rooms, if you could pop that in the chat, then Alexia and the rest of the land use team can see what you're able to contribute. And then the second question, please discuss anything that has sparked your interest and generate 2 questions for our panel. If the note takers could pop those 2 questions that you decide to ask in the chat, then we will we'll pick out the ones that we like, and then we'll ask you to vocalize those to the panelists and they will answer them. And if you're very lucky, we've got 12 rooms, and how many panelists? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You might get a panelist in your room if you're extra lucky. So be luck of the draw. Okay, your 15 minutes starts now. See you all soon. Brilliant. Thank you. You've all got that kind of warm, smiley breakout room glow. I can see you've all had good conversations. So could you please, the note takers, could you put the 2 questions from your group in the chat? And to help Lecky out, can you put 2 question marks in front of the question so we can identify it on the chat? And then everyone else, if you could just pop in the chat how you would like to contribute to this project. So ideas, time, land, money. I think it'd be really great to see that coming through on the chat. I think it'd be really energizing to see. So 2 tasks. And while that is happening, Lecky, if you could start to look at the questions coming in and start to pick out ones that you like. And
so
then,
perhaps we could start with the question from our group, just to kick things off, and then I can keep an eye on the chat as we go. So what we thought we'd do, rather than just keep hearing my voice droning on, we wanted to identify a question from the group, but then ask somebody from that group to ask it so we can hear from you. So from our group, could I ask Ed Bursey, who's here, to ask a question about the genetics of trees, the appropriateness of planting, again, our veteran trees, and also about a possible resource where we might be able to find out about appropriate trees for a given climate. So over to you, Ed.
Yeah, hello, thanks for that. So I was interested in the comments previously about tree genetics, and then there was a stream of information that came up in the comments, people talking about how important it was to use seeds from veteran trees because they're proven in the soils and proven in the climate. And then other people were saying, oh, but the climate is changing and we should be choosing species that will be appropriate for the climate in the future. Robin's a friend of mine, and I'm sure, Robin, that at some point you told me there was a resource out there, and this is really my question because I thought it would be very interesting for everybody. I may have got this completely wrong, so forgive me, but is there somebody that's done the research where you can either give it a location, tell a system a location and it suggests species for the future, or is it that you say, will these species be compatible for this location? I can't remember, it was something like that. Does that resource exist? It's a question for Robin.
Thank you, Ed.
So shall I just dive in and answer that then, Rob?
Yeah, and if you could keep the answers as concise as you can, then we can hear
okay.
from the
So
people.
it's a friend of mine. I think we spoke about this before. The resource is the Forestry Commission Ecological Site Classification, ESC, ESC it's known as, Ecological Site Classification, and they've mapped soils and locations, and so you can look ahead, you can pinpoint your spot and say, what will the climatic conditions be under sort of high and low emission scenarios in 2050, 2080? And according to that, what's the soil moisture deficit regime? What's the rainfall? What's the average temperature? All that kind of stuff. And then how do all our trees perform? Oak, ash, beech, and all the forestry trees, Douglas, Sitka, hemlock, Scott pine, everything under the sun. And so it's quite a sort of technical way of modelling what sort of favourable conditions, so to speak, for your plantation. Now, of course, there's more to life than just growing trees to kind of maximum size and capacity. And there's a very important conservation argument, which I'm sure other people on the panel will have more to say about. My ecologist friend Adrian Newton is concerned about kind of polluting ancient woodlands with stock from trees from the central France, because they're going to perform better under future climate because they're not locally genetic. So it kind of depends what you're aiming for. If you're aiming for sort of maximum growth, that's one thing. If you're aiming to conserve local genetics, that's another. It is a complicated topic, and there's more than one side to it. So it's a bit of an open answer there, but perhaps someone else can.
Thank you so much, Robin. I think we'll just leave that one there so we can hear from more people. Just before I hand back to Lecky, it's great to hear all of these contributions flying in: land, money, and labour. Excellent. Keep them coming in. Thank you. Lecky.
So it feels like part of the value of this evening is to sort of develop a bit of a theme, but I also want to maintain a bit of breadth. But just picking up on that last question, could we go to group 7, Ian Rees, with your question?
No, I'm getting there. So it's just a question about what's native. That was the one question we had. We didn't have two. Should we be focusing on the what's now, what's in the past, or what's in the future? But I guess we've kind of tackled that already through other conversations here. So I don't necessarily think we need an answer, but that was the point of discussion that we had in our group.
Thank you, Ian. Anyone you want to direct that to particularly?
Nope.
Okay. Let's hear from a speaker we haven't heard from much yet. Thank you. Any panelists can step forward.
Sorry.
Yeah, go Tony.
So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of criticism, for instance, about sycamore. At one time, we used to persecute sycamore as hard as we could go. George Peterkin, who's one of the woodland experts in this country, says that in France, sycamore occurs in woodland up to 5%, and it's no bother whatsoever. And it's a bit warmer in France, so 5% sycamore is perfectly acceptable here. Sycamore is as tough as old boots, and I have used it, planted it in places where other trees might easily not survive. So it's quite useful. It also has a huge crop of aphids, roots, which is extremely good for blue tits and things to feed on. So it's not a tree without considerable merit. And I think dismissing sycamore, which has gone on in the past, is, you know, not entirely valid. And in the long term, sycamore doesn't regenerate under itself because it casts such a heavy shade. So in fact, it becomes self-limiting. So that's a good example where a non-native tree brought to this country by the Normans could easily be quite an important species when it comes to climate change and we get warmer. The other thing about genetic varieties and so on, and what is native and what isn't, is that the more variation in the genetics that we have in an area, the better, because we really don't know where climate's going to go precisely. And the other thing about native species is that there are, from my point of view as an entomologist, lots of things feed on the native trees, whereas you bring something foreign in, it may have no resident food, no resident species that will feed on it. Sycamore acquires its fauna from field maple, which is native and is closely related. So these things are, you know, quite complicated equations to add up, and you've got to almost have a little matrix to science, look at the benefits. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
Awesome answer, so informative. Thank you, Tony.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Again, trying to meander with a little bit of continuity, but a question here from Toby. There's so many questions, I'm slightly losing track of what they're coming from, but I hope you don't mind. What are the criteria? No, sorry, over to you, Toby Branston. Would you like to ask your question?
If I can find the mute button, yeah. Yeah, what are the criteria for choosing species? So not in a specific project, but you know, for how do we choose species? For rate of production, how, you know, for benefit of speed, how quickly it's going to grow, for sequestration, whatever the word is, of carbon dioxide, you know, calorific value, and, you know, that sort of thing. What is there a way you can choose species rather than saying, oh, I quite like field maple? So I don't know who would be able to answer that one.
Would anyone like to step forward for that?
I think Tony's contributed. There he is. He's put his hand up.
Getting questions from Toby, perhaps not fair, but anyway, that if you take field maple as an example, it's a great tree for Purbeck. Some of the best field maple I've seen anywhere grow in Purbeck. So that's obviously a tree that one would choose, so to make sure there are future generations of field maples to carry on from those superb examples that there are already there. But again, I think choosing a mixture and deciding what the objectives of a wood is quite important. In a wood that we planted at West Bexington over in the west of Dorset, we included holm oaks, which of course are not native, but they're evergreen. And so on the coast, like West Bexington, where you've got birds coming in on migration, coming into an area where you've got evergreen trees could be quite useful shelter for them after a long journey across the sea from the continent. So again, where you're choosing what to plant, you may want to choose what are your objectives for that planting. That same planting, we put some odd apple trees in so there was a food resource for birds. In that case, perhaps with the apples more for them leaving to go somewhere. But so there are lots of reasons for perhaps not planting the obvious things, but evergreen cover can be very important as part of your planting. And seeing what those trees provide for other things that may be in the area, or what may be significant species in the area, like field maple. It's just a brief few thoughts.
Thank you very much, Tony. So such a lot to consider. Really interesting. Thank you. Tom Clark, do you want to ask a question from Group 8?
Yeah, so thanks, Becky. Yeah, so our question was around ash. Obviously, ash is under threat and significant ash dieback. So are we going to look at collecting seed from some of the veteran ash trees that are still going in Purbeck and looking to bring those on, or look for some genetic diversity within our existing tree stock. That's a question for anybody who wants to answer it.
I'll say something. We were talking about this today, and I think this is something that we, as part of our research and seed gathering, we'll look into this and find, ask around, see where people have got species that are surviving, and yes, definitely collect from them and work out what the best thing to do is to ensure that they continue. So yeah, it'd be part of our project. But if anyone else wants to add as well.
Yeah. The Woodland Trust collected seed from all over the country, as far as I can recall, in order to see whether some were more resistant to ash dieback than others. I don't know where this planting was. I have a feeling it was somewhere like Kent, but I've never seen any results from that. One of the problems with ash is that young trees are more vulnerable than old trees, so it's very difficult to look at a seed, a big seed tree, and say, oh, that seems to be resistant. But one of the things that the Dutch have found, and some of you may have seen pictures of it, they have used trees of the same provenance down roadsides, and because they're all genetically the same, ash dieback has just gone through them like a dose of salts and wiped the whole lot out. Whereas what I've seen in this country is ash dieback taking a patchy take from here and there, so that some trees are obviously more vulnerable to it than others.
Thank you very much, Tony.
Just comment on that one?
Oh, please do, Robin. Yeah.
Yeah, I've just posted in the chat. Oh, hold on. There we go. I think the trial you're talking about, Tony, or certainly a similar one, is Future Trees, Future Tree Trust, I think they're called, and I think they're in Oxfordshire, and they've been, as you say, gathering apparently resistant trees, seeing which ones do best, and then hopefully developing a seed orchard from crossbreeding. I mean, the prognosis from Denmark was that 95% of ash are going to die, but that, on the upside, that leaves 5%. 1 in 20 is going to survive. So, yeah, there could be ash trees dotted all over Purbeck that are going to survive. There might be individuals here and there. There might be a whole clump. So it's well worth keeping your eyes out. You're not really able to buy ash from nurseries, and the Forestry Commission will not fund planting of ash because it's just a no-no at the moment. So we're in a bit of a hiatus at the moment. But if you find locally resistant trees, then why not? Why not have a go with a local tree nursery? It'd be really interesting to see what happens. But be prepared for failure.
Thank you, Robin. Just before we move on, can I just quickly acknowledge what an amazing stream of offers and suggestions that are coming through on the chat. Thank you so much. Keep them coming, and we'll try to gather them together as much as we can. But it's very exciting, the sort of ideas that people are coming forward with. So thank you so much. Just quickly, I noticed Mark Singleton had put his hand up. Mark, would you like to say something?
I actually just raised it as a question. I didn't know if any experts actually knew whether the prevalence of ash dieback is less in coastal areas.
Thanks, Mark. Anyone like to come back to that?
Again, I'll come in on that. I hadn't heard that. That's really interesting. It may be because it's windier. It's a fungal disease, and so it tends to kind of sporulate and spread best in still damp areas. So one of the recommendations is to thin wood, so actually there's more circulation of air. I guess there's a lot of circulation of air, on the cliffs of Purbeck. So maybe that's helpful. I've not seen. I'd be interested to see if someone's written something about, an unusually high rate of survival. I'd be interested to see that.
Interesting. Thank you very much. Luke, I think you've got a couple of questions that relate to the practicalities of delivering these projects and maintenance that might well be heading towards Richard Bradford's way. So would you like to ask those?
Sure, yeah, thanks, Lecky. Yeah, just a really simple question that we came up with on our group on a practical level is What's the best alternative to the plastic coils you see that go hand in hand with nearly every tree ever planted, it seems? We don't really think they're brilliant, or are we wrong? So what would be the best alternative?
Shall I try and answer that? We have for the first time used recycled cardboard tubes. They are more fiddly to put on. They seem to get less vandalized in an urban area, which is quite interesting, because it's not so much fun in pulling out the canes and then bashing the plastic. It will be interesting to see how they survive. We've used 500 of them this year, and they do get chewed by dogs. So there are all hazards. Schools of thought vary regarding the guards. They have their place. They are quite good for marking where you have planted trees. So if you're doing gapping up in a hedgerow, they're quite good in that respect. Some people say put up if you can afford it, put up a proper fence and keep the deer out at least. But that means you may still get voles and you may still get rabbits chewing them. Some people say plant twice as many trees and suffer the losses. So it's horses for courses. Depends on what you're trying to achieve. They are useful. We try and remove ours within 3 years, but they do. They are meant to be biodegradable, and when they start falling apart, they sure fall apart. And you've got a heck of a mess to try and pick up. It would be lovely if someone could come up with a better solution, but spiral guards for small trees are probably it's probably worth it, but you have to bear in mind that by the time you put on a guard and you put on a cane, you've doubled the price of the tree. So
what you need to
you really need to work out what your objective is. Is it mass planting to try and encourage regeneration in the next 20 years? Working out the right tree and the right place also needs to work out what's your objective of the planting. What's the purpose? And some guards work better on some trees than others.
Thank you very much, Richard. Dorset hedge layer looks like you'd like to come in there.
Yeah, with regards to the tree guards, etc. One of the things you've got to do the maintenance with it. It's not a case. So many times I come across people put them on, and that's it. At the end, that's their job done. They planted it, put the spiral on, and walk away. The maintenance afterwards, you have still got to keep going with it. Weeding around and pulling the grass out. It's an ideal little greenhouse at the end of the day for anything else to grow in there. Going back to with regards to cardboard ones, I went to the Arb show at Western Arboretum a couple of years ago. Somebody's done a lot of planting just to the west of Dorchester. They took a big chance with the cardboard equivalent, and they lasted about a month. Just weather, nature, etc., and that was no good at all for them and that. But there was something on another site I was on the other day. They sort of started doing a bit of a survey, and they've just decided not to bother at all for the losses that they'd have, with the view of laying or either planting on again in a couple of years' time. They were more than happy to sort of give up the odd one or two that they're going to lose sort of per 5-6 meters, something like that.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. It sounds like you'll be extremely useful to be involved in this project. So I don't know if you could reveal your name.
Yeah, it's Russell Woodham.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to pick up on that, or should we move on to another question? Richard.
Sorry, can I just follow up? It's quite easy getting volunteers to plant trees. It's a feel-good thing. It's the aftercare of those trees for the next 2 to 3 years, which is much harder work. And trying getting volunteers to do that is not easy. I mean, when we planted over 1,200 trees in a hedge March last year. It then, the week after that, it didn't rain until September. And we had 8 volunteers going out every 2 weeks, carrying 1.5 tons of water. And they would walk on those sessions. They would walk between them. They walked 40 kilometers carrying that water. You know, it's a big ask for people to look after trees once they've been put in, but it's absolutely vital to their success. So I'd love to hear the incentives that we can offer people to look after the trees they have planted. It may be, you know, working with young people, you know, that they have an interest in bringing mum and dad and everybody else along to help.
Yeah, I'd like to echo what you said there about maintaining the trees and particularly clearing up and removing the plastic guards when they're no longer needed, as I'm often finding bits of spiral guard. I don't like spiral guards. You always, and the strimmers, people who strim can't see them. So they often get, when we planted in schools, unfortunately some of them have been trimmed, but removing them. And I'm exploring possibly using ones that you can reuse again. Maybe that's a good way if you can collect them. If you've got enough people, with this group, there's 800 people, is it, on the Planet Purbeck? Then there's a lot of people to go out and big working party of clearing up these plastic guards. So yeah, that's a big thing to think about.
Yeah, we've quite often reused plastic tubes for a second planting. And one of the things that really annoys me when I go around the countryside sometimes is finding woods where there are just piles of discarded tubes. And you know, they're an absolute blot on the landscape, and they prevent the plants growing. They're just appalling. But the other thing, when you have working parties in the summer, which we have done on odd occasions, is have a barbecue afterwards. It makes the whole event, you know, much more of a fun thing, really. Put in some work, have some fun. I must admit that one classic time I remember doing this was this planting at Bexington, and we worked like mad, done all the maintenance work, got down to the beach, got the barbecue out, and the heavens opened, and the whole thing was just completely washed out. But, you know, it's worth trying, and it certainly makes it more fun.
Absolutely, Tony. Thank you for saying that, because that's very much what Planet Purbeck wants to do. And this is about making a significant impact, but also having a really good time while we're at it. I've noticed John Bullen's mentioned in the chat also about sort of creative ideas about looking after these projects that we want to do. And I know my mum actually suggested the idea of having, you know, adopt a tree within the villages where the trees are planted around, and everyone could take responsibility for looking after their tree, which is within walking distance of their homes, and watch these trees grow and be nourished by them. So I think this is an opportunity to sort of get creative about how we can make this work.
That's one of the things that we do in our schools tree project. When the children plant their trees out, those trees are labelled from when they grew the seed, and then they go out and see them. And we've had some wonderful stories about, for instance, a little boy being met by somebody from the parish council, and he said, "I've been to see my tree and it's got leaves on it." And it helps them appreciate these things, and they really do take ownership, which is absolutely what you want.
Brilliant. Thank you, Tony. Richard, you've got your hand up. I'm aware that we also haven't heard from Nigel, and I'm not sure I can see you on my screen, so I don't want to be missing anything. So, Richard, would you like to come in on that?
If I could come in just to say, whether we're putting guards on or whatever guards we're putting on, they need to be put on correctly. The number of times I see tree planting around where tree guards are put on upside down, stakes aren't put in correctly, spirals aren't put on correctly. Whatever we're using, we need to be using them correctly, so that it gives the tree the best chance.
Absolutely, Nigel, thank you very much. And I really get the feeling that we've got the expertise amongst us to make this work. So it's fantastic. Just going to put into the whole room here that we've got an offer from Pete Matthews, who works with probation services, that he'd be able to get a team of strapping young men and women to do weekly waters on any of our planting projects, which sounds very promising. So thank you very much, Pete. There's a question also in the chat that I thought would be quite interesting to draw on about carbon sequestration. We've not got a huge amount of time, but David has mentioned about this issue of fast-growing trees as a sort of promise of carbon capture, but actually that might not be the key measure of carbon capture, and indeed an awful lot of that's going on in the soil. David, would you like to speak to that, seeing as it's a sort of theme that's come up a lot, certainly in the chat?
Yeah, I can do. I mean, you've kind of said it really. I just think it's easy to think of trees equal carbon, and just understanding when at this latitude, most of our carbon is naturally stored in the soils rather than the above ground vegetation. The further north you go, the closer to the poles, the more its carbon is stored in the soils rather than in the above ground vegetation. And here, really, if we can restore long-term healthy soils, we're doing an awful lot for carbon. And I think my own view would be, rather than go for the quickest growing trees at the expense of wildlife, choose the trees which are, naturally part of our healthy woodland ecosystems. They'll support the best wildlife, and they'll restore the healthy soils with all the soil fungi in particular, which is what drives a lot of the carbon sequestration in soils, rather than the actual woody growth of the trees. I mean, it's both, but that's important. So I would sort of focus on soil would be my tip.
Brilliant.
On that one?
Thank you. Yes, Robin, please.
Yeah, so the Forestry Commission has done a lot of work on this for their woodland carbon code, and they've modelled tree growth and by implication carbon sequestration. And actually over 50 years, it doesn't make much difference whether it's conifer or broadleaf. And as the previous speaker said, a lot of it's in the soil. Yeah, it's certainly over half in temperate woodland. So it's you in Purbeck, is what we're talking about. I wouldn't base your choice of species solely on their carbon properties. There's a lot more to trees than just carbon, and biodiversity, wildlife, shelter, all these other things are also very important. I mean, the other thing, of course, is conifers tend to be harvested, and there's debate about removals from the forest and how long those things are kept out of circulation. So long-term storage in buildings is obviously a good source. Putting it into a biomass boiler, the carbon straight out into the atmosphere again. That's obviously not sequestering it for any time at all. So long-term storage is probably more likely in broadleaf woods. Shorter term might be in conifers, but it's a hotly disputed area, as a number of things around trees.
Thank you, Robin. It's so nice even just to get a flavour of some of these debates. It's so inspiring to think about what we can all go about and read about and learn about. So thank you. I'm aware that we're running short of time. This is why we extended the event to 2 hours, and even then it doesn't seem long enough. I'm also getting pings from people joining our mighty network. It's brilliant. Thank you so much. Just one more question from, I think we can just fit in from Hester. Would you like to bring your question from your group, just to go in a slightly different direction for the last few minutes? And then I'll invite our panelists just to have a few closing words about what you all think we should do next and what you like about what we've spoken about. So over to you, Hester.
Well, this might be a what can we do next lead in, because our question was, how can we pressure or work with, however you want to spin it, developers and planners to include hedgerows and trees when they're thinking about new developments? That goes to whoever might have an idea about it, and I'm wondering whether that might not even be the panelists. I don't know, anyone who has an idea.
Richard, I could see your hand up. Anyone else that'd like to come in after Richard, please unmute yourself and do come in.
My understanding is that in Dorset Council has a protocol that specifies a number of trees that need to be planted if they are replacement trees. It's woefully inadequate from what I can see, but it is a step in the right direction. It is the enforcement of it that is always difficult. Same with any trees that they take down. they will quite often be required, developers will quite often be required to put them in, put more trees in, but unless it is enforced, that they will ignore that. One of the big problems I think with hedgerows is that a developer may quite often try and incorporate it into the boundary of people's houses, and then when the house is bought, the new owner quite often takes the hedge down. So they actually lose control, and how you get that in perpetuity retention of those features is quite often beyond the planning authorities, I'm afraid.
Yes, can I just mention at this point, I'm a Dorset councillor for Wareham, and I've been on planning committees, and actually we have almost put an enforcement order on developers, especially Langton Travers, about keeping trees in the area, and also actually maintaining hedgerows. And certainly round Wareham, if you look at Westgate, which is opposite the Purbeck school, or by the bypass, the hedge was kept there by the Law Homes, and actually it was an agreement that that should be kept, and they must maintain it, because remember, developers very often will maintain all of the surrounding area for quite a number of years and then pass it on to the district, the Dorset Council, but that has been maintained. Yeah.
Thank you, Beryl. Tony, would you just like to add in there? And then I think we're going to have to draw this discussion to a close, sadly. So Tony, then come back to all the speakers.
Yeah, in both the Purbeck district local plan that was produced just before they ceased to exist, and the new Dorset County plan, there are sections on green infrastructure, but they're woefully thin. I mean, we did write to the Woodland Trust to get support for better green infrastructure in the Purbeck plan, which the Purbeck District Council then took on. But it's still very thin, and it is enforcing it that is always the trouble. I can remember one planning inquiry that I did years ago, and the mineral company, it was in that case, had very blatantly planted the area with what they were obliged to do from a previous planning application just before they applied for their next planning application, which was about a 20-year gap. People won't do these things unless there is really fairly strong enforcement for some of them. So, yeah. It is, I think, enforcement that really is necessary.
And Hess, perhaps that's another one for the campaigning team to have a think about what we can do to express our support for seeing these areas of our landscape prosper and be a bit messy and full and thick and plentiful. And with that in mind, I think Katie Black might be here, who's works on the public rights of way and deals with sort of verges and hedges. So again, if we can show public support for things not all being tidied up, then we have the means to influence at least part of this process. So I'm really sorry to say that we're going to have to close the discussion. It's been so exciting. I'm very grateful to all of the contributors. Could we just have a couple of very brief words from each of our panelists, just to give us perhaps a piece of closing advice and some inspirational words with us to take forward, and then Rob and I will close the evening and just sort of revisit where we're going to go next.
So what I can do is I can just call the panelists in. So let's go, Robin Walter first.
Sorry, how long have we got?
Just a minute each.
Okay, right. Yeah, so just actually to continue from what was just being said about enforcement, yeah, we've certainly found that in Shaftesbury and new housing estates. You know, whatever's in the plan doesn't appear on the ground. And then, of course, the developers look after the trees, well, look after it, in inverted commas, for several years. And of course, the grounds crew come along and strim round the bottom of trees. It drives me crazy. These things cost like 100 quid each. Some guy comes along and strims it. Oh, God. Anyway, personal bugbear. So obviously, the first thing you should all do next is buy my book. But apart from that, it goes into so I mean, I spoke with great haste on a wide number of topics. They're all dealt with in greater detail in the book, and there's loads of kind of facts and figures. I'm absolutely thrilled that there's so much interest in trees. It's really kind of the tree moment, and it's complicated. Trees are complicated. Native, non-native, conifer, broadleaf, conservation, production, local, global. Some people hate trees, other people actually love them. It's really complicated and it's really nuanced. And we've seen that in the questions and in the answers. What do we do about genetics? What do we do about landowners? What do we do about neighbours? What should we be planting where? And are we planting for carbon or are we planting for wildlife? It's really, it requires a lot of thought, a lot of reading, and talking to people and discussions like this. I mean, I've learned a lot tonight. Certainly a lot about Purbeck. It's brilliant, and so trees are not a solution. I mean, stopping emissions is the solution. Trees are a sort of we can mop up some of the unavoidable stuff. So anyway, thanks for having me.
Thank you very much for coming, Robin.
Well, yeah, awesome to have you. Thank you so much. Glad to hear you learned something too, Robin. We've certainly learned so much from you. Richard Bradford.
Yeah, fabulous amount of enthusiasm. Lovely to see that. And that's just in Purbeck. Imagine that spread across the whole of Dorset, from Wimborne right through to Lyme, all the way across the county, north to south, east to west. And imagine, your project being taken up by other groups, like-minded groups. So you end up with a great big hedge all the way from Ringwood, all the way through to beyond Lyme, from Portland right up to Shaftesbury and up to Beminster. Have vision as to how big this can actually grow. Have the imagination. It drives people forward, and you will win lots and lots of friends and lots of volunteers.
We're all beaming with smiles. What an inspirational vision. Thank you, Richard. I don't know if you want to say anything, Lecky, about that.
No, it's just so exciting. It's such a great vision and I think one thing that we loved when we came up with this idea was this trace through the countryside that is embodied in the hedgerows, but it's about our imaginations and it's about our hope for the future. And the idea that percolates out across Dorset and beyond is really exciting prospect. So thanks for capturing that, Richard.
Awesome. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Lecky. Sarah.
Sorry, I was writing, so I've missed the brief of what I'm supposed to be saying. Sorry. Final word. Look at trees. Look up at trees. One of my favourite things to do is just look up at the leaves and through the sky, and just start learning what they are and feel all the leaves coming out and just enjoy it. It's a beautiful time of year, isn't it? It's just absolutely brilliant. So if that was the right thing, I'll just say that.
That'll do.
And this is
Thank
brilliant.
You,
this is really exciting. It's lovely to see all this energy. So thanks.
Thank you, Sarah.
Awesome. Tony.
Yes, one thing I haven't mentioned is that Trees for Dorset is doing something of this sort. We have a charter about I'm Backing a Greener Britain, which is trying to link in with all sorts of things that other people are doing elsewhere around the country. But I think one of the things is that to achieve Richard's vision, we all need to work together. So, Trees for Dorset, I think, our I'm Backing a Greener Britain is very much in line with Your Planet Purbeck, and getting all that linked up together, I think, is absolutely essential, because together we can achieve all sorts of things. So I think that's where I need to say.
I think you've summarised the philosophy here at Planet Purbeck, which is stronger together, and that's what we aim to do here. Thank you, Tony. Next, Nigel Hewish.
Well, I think everybody said exactly the same as what I was going to say. Richard summed it up really well. Within our breakout group, we talked about two things really, and one of those was the variety of people that are here tonight from across the county, and all those links will be like a large hedge. Join all those up, and it creates that hedgerow corridor throughout Dorset. The other thing that we talked about in the breakout group was the size of hedges, and we talked about some of the technicalities of that, but the main thing is the bigger the better. So the more you can do, the better it will be. I'll leave it there.
So many great catchphrases. Bigger the better. Love it. Thank you, Nigel. Well, Lecky, you've got all this energy and enthusiasm and faces beaming back at you, wanting to know what we do next. The floor is yours.
Well, I'm afraid I'm not going to, hang on, there we are. Just let's have a look at this slide once more to revisit what we can all do. So join us, as loads of people have been doing all evening. There's a link to the Mighty Network, and on there we can all collaborate in the way that it's clear that we know we need to do to deliver this in a meaningful way. And we're already collaborating with organisations across Dorset. So, and the message is the bigger the better. So please join us. We need everybody's help, and we need people to be involved. You can email me directly. My email's there, alexiahastrom@gmail.com. I'm more than happy to give you more information and steer you in the right direction. And then anything else that Planet Purbeck are doing, including our other events, including the festival, find out more at planetpurbeck.org. Don't forget, you've now all seen the extraordinary expertise of Richard Bradford. He has such a lot of experience with hedgerows, and they clearly have so much in them for, that we can learn from. So let me know if you'd be interested in participating in one of his hedgerow outings, which will be COVID safe, but nevertheless in person. And then again, we'll be in contact via our platforms about seed collection, sucker and sapling gathering. And please, for anyone that wants to attend our next meeting, which will be a really action-focused meeting on Tuesday, the 25th of May at 5 p.m. And I look forward to meeting you there and working together. So thank you all so much.
So yeah, let's just give our speakers and Lecky some appreciation for an awesome night. I've really enjoyed myself. I felt like an audience member tonight. It's been wonderful. It's hard to summarise. I feel like all I can say is how I feel, which is inspired. My heart is racing. I want to get on with doing all of these amazing things, and I can't stop smiling. It's been a wonderful night, and I think it's been a well-balanced night. We've had an evening of expertise and experience and intelligent debate, but also plenty of passion and offers of land, labour and fundraising ideas. And we've had over 70 people here at our peak from the community, desperate to get involved. And so many takeaways, bigger the better, and how we need to collaborate together to achieve this, and how we can start this project here and see it right across Dorset, having hedgerows and woodlands right across Dorset, wildlife corridors, bigger the better, awesome. What we like to do at Planet Purbeck to finish on is a big roar of stronger together. So my invitation for you is to come off mute, and then we do a little countdown, 3, 2, 1, and then we roar stronger together, because we know the only way to achieve these big lofty dreams and visions is to all band together. And just let yourself feel inspired. So 3, 2, 1, stronger together. Let's do it. Let's do it, Dorset. Great to see you all, and wonderful. The pub will be open in a couple of minutes if you want to carry on the conversation. Grab yourself a drink. Yeah, thank you, Lecky.
Thank you.
Well done, Lexi.
Thank you.
Relief. Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Fantastic. Well done.
Bye. Thank you very much.
Good night. Good night.
Cheerio,
Thanks,
everybody.
Lecky and Rob. Thanks, everybody.
Keep up the enthusiasm.
Bye.